Ed Hemsler is a man in retirement who thinks something unusual is happening in the world, and so, every day, he takes the necessary steps to prepare for the looming disaster on the horizon. Ronnie Meissner is a lady working at the antique shop and spending her days hoarding things that remind her of the daughter she lost earlier in her life. In the story of Tomorrow's Man, their paths will cross and they will both get the opportunity to make each other's lives a bit better. One day, Ed is talking to his son over the phone and points out he is driven to pass to his son the knowledge he gathered over the years. Ed talks in detail to his son about the things he noticed in the world, but his son doesn't seem to be too interested in his father's theories. He is just glad to hear his father is doing well. Ed spends his days going shopping in the local supermarket. One time, he introduces himself to the girl working in the supermarket, saying it is always a good idea to know your neighbors. He writes down his name and phone number and gives the paper to the supermarket employee. When he arrives home, Ed usually spends some time on the computer doing research about the potential disaster and world events and talking to like-minded people online. Ed has a lonely life, but encounters a lot of people as he is doing his daily obligations. He goes to pour some gas in his car at the gas station and meets a man who smiles at him, also pouring gas in his car. Ed arrives home, checks his online group for new information, makes dinner, and sits in front of the TV to listen to news. The reporter talks about the daily news in the United States, and at one point mentions Ed's name and appears to be talking directly to Ed and commenting on him peacefully sitting in his chair while the world passes him by. It is probably Ed's subconscious playing tricks with him, because he feels guilty that he is not doing more for the world. He soon goes to bed and falls asleep. The next day, Ed is again at the supermarket, doing his chores and waiting in the long line. He sees an older lady buying some supplies at the counter. Back at his home, Ed carefully cuts some vegetables and makes a sandwich before going back to following the news. Ed is in the waiting line, standing before the same lady that he noticed earlier. He observes her as she is paying for the product she bought but doesn't say anything. The lady leaves the supermarket and Ed stays behind, completely mesmerized. The clerk calls his name and he goes back to reality. Later, at his home, Ed spends some time thinking about the woman he saw. Ed is in his car, at the parking lot. He is waiting for someone. The same woman appears, parks her car and enters the supermarket. Ed quickly moves his car and parks it next to the woman's, but in a way that is blocking the entrance to her car. After a while, the woman returns and realizes she can't go inside her car. Ed comes running from the store and saves the day. He immediately moves his car to unblock the front entrance. The lady seems confused by what is happening, but Ed confidently introduces himself and says he has seen her around. The woman replies, saying her name is Ronnie. They chat for a while and Ronnie drives away. Later, Ed does a research on Ronnie's full name, as he is curious to learn more about her, but he doesn't find anything. In the next couple of days, the duo accidentally meets in the supermarket and greet each other. After one of the encounters, Ed goes to Ronnie's car and tells her he has known she is prepared ever since he saw her the first time. He says her shopping is strategic, as if she is aware of what is happening in the world. Ronnie doesn't know what to say, and Ed suggests getting a cup of coffee. They sit in the cafe and Ed enthusiastically talks about his ideas about the world. He asks Ronnie if she would like another cup of coffee, but she excuses herself and says she is already late and needs to be on her way. Ronnie enters the antique shop and the girl working at the counter reminds her she is late. Ronnie puts on her working vest and she starts working. A bit later, Ed enters the same shop, finds Ronnie, who probably mentioned earlier that she works there, and suggests going out that evening for an apple or peach pie. Ronnie agrees and says she likes pie. Ed picks her up in her truck and tells her there is also a karaoke bar in the restaurant. They sit down, order some food, and start having a bit more serious conversation. Ed tells her about his job before retirement, and about his son. At some point, he realizes he is talking way too much and asks Ronnie to share something about herself. She says she had a daughter who was her life, and she passed away. But she still tries to keep an optimistic view of life and do the things she enjoys, such as sewing. Ronnie adds that her husband also passed away, but not from the rare disease like her daughter, but from cancer. Ed says he is sorry about what happened to her. They exit the restaurant and start driving home. As Ed is driving, Ronnie is checking out the radio stations and trying to find some music to play. Ed says that radio is only good for news and weather, but Ronnie manages to find a station playing songs. Ed hears the music and suddenly stops talking. He stops the car on the side of the road, opens the door and starts running away from the car. Ronnie thinks her singing was horrible and made Ed leave, but Ed assures her it's not that. He finally expresses that he really likes her and it scares the hell out of him. Ronnie walks out of the car as well, and joins Ed in the field. They kiss and hug, and stay in that position for a while. Ed drives Ronnie home, they kiss one more time, and she is about to walk away, but she then changes her mind and asks Ed if they can go to his place. Ed happily accepts and drives them to his place. They enter. Ed offers to take Ronnie's jacket off and get her some water. Ronnie seems to truly enjoy Ed's home. Everything has its order. They sit on the couch and Ed asks what she would like to watch. He offers some sports programs. Ronnie explains she likes to watch war documentaries, and Ed finds one about the World War. Ronnie says her father was in a war, and Ed answers he never got the chance to participate in one. They spend some time eating popcorn, talking, and watching the movie. Ed tries to make a romantic move, but Ronnie stops him and asks if they can just watch the movie on the couch for a while. Ed agrees and they continue enjoying the moment. The next morning, Ronnie wakes up and realizes she is late for work. Ed just made them both a cup of coffee, but Ronnie starts panicking and tells him she is late to work and needs to get there quickly. Ed drives her to work. Ronnie arrives at the store, feeling a bit ashamed for being late. Her coworker, Tina, teases her about it but doesn't seem upset. Later during the day, Ronnie finds a perfume in a lovely bottle in the store and decides to buy it. By the end of the day, there is an electricity shortage in town. Ed is at his place, watching news about it. He again imagines the TV speaker talking directly to him and saying Ed has prepared himself well for the electricity shortage and has an extra electricity generator. Ronnie is about to leave the store with Tina, who is asking about Ronnie's new friend. Tina gets in the car that is waiting for her and tells Ronnie not to do anything she wouldn't do twice. Ronnie stays alone on the street. All the stores are closed and there is no electricity. The next day, Ed comes by to Ronnie's store to ask if she would like to get some Chinese food with him. Ronnie is not thrilled to see him and Ed is surprised and confused by her reaction. She tells him she was expecting to hear from him after spending the night at his place and kissing him. Ed justifies himself by saying he thought she needed some break from him. Ronnie assures him she doesn't need any break and they end up going for lunch. While they are enjoying the Chinese food, Ed explains that the internet being the largest virtual library in the world. Ed asks Ronnie what she would like to know on any topic and says she needs to think about what she would like to know about Ed, as well as in general. Some time later, Ed is shopping in the store and talking to his son over the phone. Ed learns at the counter that they no longer accept checks. As he is walking out of the store, he reminds his son he is still his father, and so he will continue acting like one. Ronnie is working at her store. She is waiting for her colleague Tina to finish the phone conversation. Ronnie explains that Ed asked her to come over for the Thanksgiving party. Tina says Ed is a good name and getting invited to a Thanksgiving dinner is a good sign. Tina thinks Ed acts like Ronnie's best friend forever, similar to how the boys in Tina's life acted when they cared about her, bringing her flowers, opening the door for her, etc. Ronnie is at Ed's home. They go to the side of the house because he wants to show her something. He asks her to close her eyes for a couple of seconds and takes out a small device which is like a magnet key. Ronnie opens her eyes and still sees only the wall of the house in front of her. Ed takes the key and places it on the wall. Something clicks and a small secret passage doorway opens in front of them. Ronnie looks surprised. They enter the storage room and Ronnie is amazed by what she is seeing. Ed asks her not to tell anyone what she saw in this room. He shows her the power supplier that he designed and food and drink supplies that could keep him alive for years and decades. Ronnie doesn't understand how he managed to build all that by himself. Ronnie and Ed are shopping together at the supermarket and having a lot of fun. They chase each other through the market, ride in the cart and laugh together. They spend the whole day together. Ronnie accompanies Ed to his home while he is unwrapping the hunted deer, and, once she sees the deer, she falls unconscious. They both put the protective sunglasses on and watch the sunset together. After the whole day spent together, Ed drives Ronnie to her home and she tells him he is the perfect gentleman. The next day, they go shooting from the gun. Ronnie feels discomfort because Ed used the teddy bear as the target. He shows how to operate the gun and she shoots the target and surprises Ed. They drive to the forest and find a peaceful camping spot. They set up a tent and make fire, and Ed tells Ronnie his theory about the emergency disaster that could happen in the future. He says it will be a day like any other, and then the TV speaker will announce the emergency, and the stocks on the market going down, and soon people will start panicking and running to the supermarkets. Then the foreign military will appear and it will be the end of society as it existed until that point. Ronnie asks Ed if he really thinks something like that could happen, and he answers that it might someday. Ed gets up and starts walking. Ronnie looks at him, wondering what he is thinking about. He tells her she sure is something special, and they both fall asleep in their sleeping bags. As they are laying, Ronnie asks him if he is okay, and he says aces and takes her hand. Ed is in his room, getting dressed for the Thanksgiving gathering at his son's home. He takes some time to wear his best suit and then goes to pick Ronnie up. Ronnie also looks all dressed up. They arrive in front of Brian's home. Brian, his wife Janet, and their daughter Janine greet them. Ed introduces Ronnie as his girlfriend to his son's family. Brian sits on the couch with his son to have a drink, while Ronnie goes into the kitchen with Janet. Ed and Brian almost immediately start arguing. Ed doesn't understand why his son claims to take care of his family, yet he didn't plan anything in case of a disaster. Brian gets upset by hearing that and suggests to his father to show him something worth seeing. In the meantime, Ronnie and Janet are in the kitchen, and Janet compliments Ronnie and says she and Ed look young and vital. Janet asks if they are planning to travel somewhere and says this is the perfect time to go somewhere. Janet and Brian are planning to go to Spain, and Janet points out how difficult it is to travel these days with all the obligations. Ed and Brian go upstairs so Ed can use the computer and show his son what he is talking about. But the argument continues. Brian says his dad is acting like he knows a secret that nobody else does. He says he is aware of what is happening, but it's still only people trying to survive life, and that is all there is to it. He reminds his father they will all die one day, including Ed. As they are talking, Janine is sitting in her room and listening to them. Janet is in front of the door. She knocks and asks them to come down for dinner, hoping she will stop the fight between them. During dinner, the family is eating turkey. The conversation goes from mashed potatoes to Janine and Brian getting into an argument. Janine supports the ideas of her grandfather and thinks everything is in vain as the world might end soon. In anger, she insults her father and, as a response, he tells her she is grounded and can't use her phone for a month. Ed is defending his granddaughter and saying she has a mind of her own, while Brian is upset that what he considers to be Ed's silly ideas are now being repeated by his daughter. Ronnie looks like she doesn't know what to say and whether she should get involved in the conversation or not. Janine gets up from the table and starts running away from the house once she hears about not being allowed to use the phone anymore. Janet and Ronnie stay in the house and pour some more wine. Ed and Brian go chasing after Janine, but she manages to escape and continues running down the street. Ed asks his son where Janine is going, and they stop to take some rest once they realize Janine is safe. Ed and Ronnie are driving back from the Thanksgiving dinner. They have some food from dinner with them. Ed drives Ronnie to her house and, for the first time, she asks him if he wants to come in. Ed accepts the invitation and they both go inside. Ronnie turns on the light and Ed realizes her home is filled with things she was buying through the years. Most of the items seem to remind her of her daughter, or they could be things her daughter would have liked while she was alive. There are books, dolls, perfumes, and many other things all over the room. Ed doesn't know how to respond to what he is seeing. Ronnie takes his hand to calm him down and explains it happened right after her daughter died. She was, at first, only leaving the items in her daughter's room. But then it spread to the rest of the house. Ronnie and Ed kiss and start taking their clothes off. They continue making out and lay on the couch filled with things. The next morning, Ronnie is already up and preparing breakfast. She is making some buttered toast and bacon. Ed wakes up still surprised by the numerous hoarded things in the house. Ronnie asks him if he would like his toast buttered and he answers he would. He gets up to check some of the things up close, like the glass perfume bottle, and suddenly falls on the floor. Ronnie comes out of the kitchen to check what happened. She thinks Ed might have dropped something, and tells him not to worry about it. Ronnie goes into the other room and sees Ed on the floor. She looks terrified after seeing him like that. Ronnie is in the waiting room in the hospital. The doctor approaches and comforts her, telling her Ed will be fine. He thinks Ed is Ronnie's husband, and she tells him she is Ed's girlfriend. The doctor explains Ed had a mild stroke, but it's a temporary one and he will feel better soon. The reason was probably because Ed didn't take his medication regularly. Ronnie is very shaken and asks if she can go see Ed. The doctor tells her she can but advises her to go easy on him. Ronnie goes to check how Ed is doing. He is awake but is not able to talk much still. Ronnie is glad to see him. She tells him she knows about the medication and that he probably didn't take it regularly because of financial problems since he was spending most of his money on his emergency supplies. She gently reminds him that he was only thinking about tomorrow, when she is right there, next to him, in the present moment, and she needs him. She starts crying the tears of happiness that Ed is well, but also of sadness, because of the thought of what could have happened to him. Brian walks in the room and says he came as soon as he heard what happened. Brian looks at Ronnie, who is standing by the window and sobbing. Ed wakes up in the middle of the night in the hospital and sees Ronnie sleeping in the chair next to him. He takes her hand and falls asleep again. Ed is ready to leave the hospital. Ronnie and his son help him pack his bag and get into the car. As Ed is driving with Brian, he sees a yard sale sign in front of a house nearby. Brian tells him he is the smartest person he knows, but Ed doesn't think that about himself. They get in front of Ed's house and Ed decides to show him something. He asks Brian if he can see anything, and when Brian explains he can't, Ed finds his magnet key and unlocks the door to his secret storage. Brian is surprised to see what his father has been doing all these years. Ed asks him to honestly tell him what he thinks, and whether the idea is crazy. Brian replies by saying he is glad his father is doing what makes him happy. Ed starts sobbing, and Brian gets a bit worried. His father turns towards him and tells him he truly feels happy and smiles. They talk about Ronnie as well and how she is a great lady. Ronnie comes for a visit, and she and Ed are having dinner. She makes sure there are 2 pills on the plate waiting for Ed. They enjoy their dinner together and cite the words of the song that once played in the truck while they were driving. They both seem to be very in love. Ed and Ronnie are in the bed. They still haven't fallen asleep. Ed mentions he saw a yard sale sign the other day and thought it was a significant, maybe even divine sign. He explains he did research on the yard sales and that people can earn a lot of money that way. He suggests maybe doing the sale one day and selling some of their things, both Ed's and Ronnie's. Ronnie asks him if he saw a light while he was in the hospital, and Ed doesn't think he did. Ronnie and Ed are sitting in the car and she tells him she also had some sort of a feeling, even though it might not be divine like Ed's. Ronnie and Ed are watching news at home and Ronnie changes the channel and finds another TV speaker. She says she likes to listen to her and she always looks classy. Ed suddenly gets upset and explains the woman in the news is his ex-wife who left many years ago. He calls her a liar. Ed changes the subject to yard sale and says it's time to do that. He suggests Tuesday for selling Ronnie's stuff. Ronnie is at her workplace, talking to her colleague Tina. She asks her what to do if her boyfriend wants her to do something she feels a bit uncomfortable with. Tina tells her never to do something a man wants her to do that she doesn't. Ed is making preparations for Tuesday's sale. He goes knocking on Ronnie's door but she is not at home. He goes to her store, feeling pretty upset, and demands to know why she is not going through with the yard sale. He reminds her they had a deal. Ronnie tells him it was his idea and not hers, and it is something he wanted to do for himself. Ronnie is still not ready to let go of the memories and the things she was gathering over the years. Tina overhears the conversation and asks if everything is okay. Ronnie politely tells Ed to leave as he is making a scene. Ed is at home, sitting in a comfortable chair, and talking to his son about the divorce and his ex-wife. Brian recalls all the door slammings he heard before his parents finally divorced. Brian also comforts his father and says that sometimes it seems like we are losing, but in reality, we are gaining. Ed is surprised to hear it was him that taught Brian that. The relationship between Ed and his son seems to be gradually improving. Ed joins the chat with his online group and writes his belief that people need to be who they are even if they don't want to. He decides to make a plan for the yard sale. He puts a table in front of his house and takes out some of the food supplies and items from his secret storage. He sits down on the chair and waits for the customers. People soon start gathering around and checking out the sale. Ed hears a voice he knows and sees Ronnie at the sale as well. She decided to come after all. She brought a bottle of glass perfume Ed noticed earlier. Ed is doing the roleplay and asks her how much the bottle is worth to her, and adds that someone else might need it more than her. He is really glad to see her at the sale. As they are talking, a light appears on the sky and starts increasing. It seems to be the sun. Everyone is watching the scene in amazement and fear, but Ronnie and Ed are ready for any kind of unexpected event. They put on their sunglasses, take each other's hand, and calmly face the emergency in front of them. Together, each of them in their own way, have found a way to overcome the painful, difficult parts of their past, to enjoy the present moment surrounded by people they care about, and to still remain prepared for the future.